what about the as you mentioned, you're operating in a lot of different countries. Do you see big differences between some of those countries in terms of the policy? I'm not talking necessarily about the simple law, but I mean the way that things are moving, and the way that we've just talked about, that people are shifting in terms of the way they want flexibility with work. Do you see differences between different countries?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a totally different position, not only in society, but in government about this question. You have, I would say, a very radical opinion in Southern Europe about where this should go and how protection, and you have a more open stance, I think, in Eastern Europe, for example. They're looking to be anti-bureaucratic in a lot of ways. Also, the job as per se is quite well perceived in society. They have a decent income, with comparable jobs. We often use the paradigm of a waiter versus, in pretty much all countries, you generally earn more than a waiter per hour. We're in Africa, totally different story. I mean, there's waiting lists to join the platform. Yeah, and obviously in a lot of countries as well, we're turning what we'd call a submerged market, where people are paid in cash as couriers, to regulated, where they're platform, where they're official workers, where they get social security. So this depends on the place you are. We used to operate in Latin America, very similar to that. Couriers or messengers, or they were generally, working a black market as such.
Yeah.
They paid cash at the end of the day or at the end of the week, and we've changing that. And I personally have sat down with politicians who've really seen that as positive, of how we're changing that and actually giving these people coverage and guarantees.
Yeah. So talking about that and the fact that you're talking to politicians, I mean, how is this debate going, do you feel? I mean, if you read the media, I think there seems to be quite a lot of kind of extreme views, let's say, a lot of this idea that there's a dystopian future waiting for us, and companies like you are creating a whole set of autonomons that are controlled by robots and so on. What are you doing about that? And I mean, how do you think policy will develop? Is it healthy to have that kind of debate going on? And are you kind of engaging in those kinds of topics in the media, or are you kind of basically staying fairly silent and letting the debate go on?
I mean, first of all, this is being debated as we speak in Brussels. I mean, this is one of the big topics right now. We're part of the conversation, both from an industry perspective as well as an individual from Glovo. So we're in the conversation. We have to be. I think regulators generally regulate better the better they're informed from every angle.
Yeah.
So my job is to say how our platform works, how the riders earn. We do surveys regularly with rider, basically their happiness, what they're asking for, what are their pain points. That's key to a regulator to regulate well. So we're in the conversations both at national level and Brussels. And the other question is, are we active? We've been fairly outspoken, I think, on gig economy and what we think. I've spoken about that, and this conversation today is about that we think, just because we believe that, flexibility, freelance model, part-time, full-time, you can connect when you want, disconnect, and it can fit in with whatever else is happening in your lifestyle, doesn't necessarily and shouldn't necessarily mean that they can't have certain guarantees. A trademark for Europe as a reference would be Italy. They regulated, and the industry and the different platforms are working with the trade unions. They're signing collective bargaining agreements with guaranteed these rights I'm talking about, and yet they maintain the freelance and that dynamic aspect that they can, they can have that flexibility that they're looking for, and not fixed hours, fixed timetables, etc., which doesn't fit into a lot of people's lifestyle. That to me makes a lot of sense. In the Nordic regions as well, which we don't operate, but there's collective bargaining agreements now which allow the worker to decide. So he can decide if he wants full employment with a series of more rigid structure and framework, or he can decide for freelance, where he's got more flexibility. That's also very interesting. So I think those are examples of where just because you're flexible and you allow that doesn't take away workers' rights. Yeah. And that is where we stand.
And does it, to take that a bit further, how fundamental is this to your business model? And it sounds like you're already operating in a number of different structures where you've got employees on the one side, you've got freelancers on the other. How, going forwards in terms of the business model for Glovo, is is it essential, or is this just something that needs to be worked out and you can work with either?
Well, we're working with three types today. It also depends on the operation. So, for example, in Eastern Europe, where there's a lot of countries that work with the third-party operators who manage the logistics for you. They still have an individual relationship with the courier. They still have our app, but that's how it works. I mean, it works very well, similar to the freelance. We also now have employees, which generally are more directed. They normally go to the same place all the time. Yeah. They don't, and it also works. So we also need the flexibility to operate and to grow, because at the end of the day, the more we grow, the more work we can offer, the more employment we can create, different types of employment. So there needs to be that consideration as well to allow not just ourselves, but there's a lot of other platform type work around which is depending on freelance workers. I mean, in Spain, the main telecos, most of the framework of the people installing our ADSLs or fiber optics across the country are freelancers. Yeah. So that in a sense is platform work as well, exactly.
Yeah. In many ways, I think you're just kind of turning into a structure that already exists.
Well, Spain's reference because it's our headquarters, but there's estimated there's over 500,000 platform workers working today in different industries. Yeah. In our industry, it's tiny. It's like 30 to 35,000 actives per month. So just see the size of.
No, it's interesting, and actually, but in the end, you bear the brunt of a lot of this kind of negative media.
We're very visual. We're very visual. Well, they see our yellow boxes in the street, and it's an easy one to call out. But it's much bigger than that, much bigger.